class, those kinds of things that we're talking about are very common and are things that I will hold you accountable for. But more important than that, you need to learn to take notes from verbal communications. That in many meetings where things were discussed, and sure enough, someone identified a risk that exists, for example, something that should be done. They come back in the next meeting, sure enough, the risk materialized, happened, and nobody did it. That verbal communication, nobody wrote it down. And so it didn't happen. Much of what communication you get from your boss is going to be verbal. Make sure you capture that and make it yours. Okay? Don't just, I don't know, 25, 30 years ago when I was in college, oh my gosh, students at a undergraduate level were taking notes as fast as they could write in class. I look around me now and I see, I don't know what you're doing on the laptops, but I don't see the fingers jumping faster than fury. Oh my gosh, have you learned to learn, there's different ways to learn. You can learn visually, you can learn, a lot of different ways, but one of the ways that you need to learn is audio. You gotta learn that way. You gotta be able to communicate and expect to have people communicate with you verbally and get the job done. Okay? When you persist in doing it, you'll become good at it. So anyway, that's just some encouragement to do that. Okay, well, we started talking about leadership and the elements that are associated with it. We got through urgency, the recognition of what people are doing that adds value, and giving that recognition both in public and in private. It needs to be aligned. If you are significantly unaligned between what you say in public and what you say in private, then you will be taken for a hypocrite. But recognition is a very powerful tool for leaders and very underutilized. You need to pay attention to what people are doing and take advantage of them by complimenting them for each and every improvement that they make. That doesn't mean you ever need to become satisfied. You shouldn't ever become satisfied, but you should be willing to complicate or to compliment where people are striving earnestly to do the right things. The sharing of the benefits, the coaching, the provoking. That's an interesting term. What does provoking mean in this context? What kind of thing are you going to provoke? Yes.
Thoughts. Different way of looking at something. If you don't provoke them to think a different way, then they're just going to keep doing the same thing, and there won't be any improvement.
Okay, very good. That's right. It's kind of a transmission. You become a conduit for what the market is demanding. What you're demanding needs to be obvious to the people that you're demanding it of, that this is because the market demands it. We've got to become more competitive. And that will never stop. Okay, engaging. There's a lot of things that we have to do as a leader. We're never going to know everything, right? So we have to engage others. From foremen all the way up through executives, our management team, we have to engage them in defining how we're going to beat the competition, how we're going to achieve what the expectations are for our contracts, and how we're going to do it better, faster, cheaper than our competitors do. So you have to be very engaging as a leader. And of course, you resource the solutions, right? You've got to get the resources. You're again, as a project manager, you're a conduit for a huge amount of resource flow, whether it's money or people or equipment or information. It's focused through you as a project manager, right? So you've got to get the resources to get the right things done. You've got to identify where training needs to occur and get that to happen. Where are the gaps that exist in your team? What's the training that needs to be there? Where are you going to get that training? And bring it to your project team so that they know and understand how to get the work done. Okay, and of course your personal example, your recognition of addressable vulnerabilities, things that, I mean, you've got to look for the gaps. You can't assume that anything is as good as it could be or as good as it needs to be. You've got to measure that. I'll give you an example. I had an architect. I just finished a school building, or we were in the midst of finishing it. We finished the brickwork on the building. And the architect wanted a meeting. He called me and the mason owner, the mason contractor, out on the job site. And he looks at the brick and he starts pointing at things. And he says, look at that row right there. Look how uneven that is. It's not acceptable. You got to take it down and redo it. And being young and inexperienced, I had no idea what I should do. What should you do? Your project manager, here the architect is saying it's unacceptable what your masonry contractor has done. Aesthetically unacceptable. Yeah?
You can look at the specs for tolerances.
Beautiful. That's exactly right. This isn't an issue of whether the architect likes it or not. Now, if the architect doesn't like it and he wants you to take it down and he's willing to pay for that, that's a different story, right? Okay? But it is a matter that can be and should be measured, right? Against the tolerances. Okay? So you get out there with a string and you pull the string line and you measure the differences, right? And you take a mic out there and you measure the brick. You don't like it? Well, we're sorry, we met the spec. If you did, you do. Okay? You see where you got to do that? I didn't. I had no idea what I should do. Didn't do that. And just let the architect run all over my mason. And my boss got angry with me. The mason, of course, was angry. I didn't do my job. Does that make sense? You got to understand those sorts of things and be willing to take it out of obscurity and measure the differences. Okay? Ask the appropriate questions. Okay? What constitutes acceptability? You wrote the spec. How do we measure that, Mr. Architect? Okay? Let's get it out and measure it. If it meets the spec, we're happy to replace it if you're willing to pay for it. But if you're not and we meet the spec, then it's got to stay. Does that make sense? Okay, so you got to recognize these things. You've got to benchmark. It means you've got to measure how you're doing today. And you got to say, hey, if we're not doing better tomorrow, then we need to put our heads together and figure out how we're going to do better tomorrow. No matter how good we are today, we've got to do better tomorrow. So how's that going to happen? Why? Because the competition's going to get better, right? We can't wait around for them to beat us. Okay, and then of course, there's always more to do than we can do. So we have to prioritize. As a leader, we got to figure out what's the most important thing. What if I did today, improve today, would it make easier to improve something else tomorrow? What should I be working on? Does that make sense? Okay, so the trustworthiness of project managers needs to be related to their ability to provide, and in fact, their providing of leadership. And again, this is a blend. This is a blend of people and systems and technology, isn't it? Okay? We got to understand what they are. If there's a gap, if there's an opportunity that we measure, and there's lots of ways to measure, where opportunities lie to improve. Where should we focus our efforts? Okay? You need to understand what those methods of measurement are. Apply them, look for the gaps, look for the opportunities, and then say, okay, what's the most important thing to do now? Okay? I mean, most of our time, probably 95% of our time, has to be involved in executing the project. But about 5% of our time better be focused on how to improve what we're doing, or things are not going to get better. We're not going to get more work. Does that make sense? Okay, this is a statement that came out of one of my love letters that I thought was appropriate here. It said, enthusiasm, this is a client speaking, enthusiasm increased because the planning proved reliable because it accommodated each trade. Okay? A lot of focus on that. How do you get everybody, all the trades, to be successful? That's part of your job as a project manager. Not just what your company is doing, but all the other subs and suppliers. And if you do that consistently, you're going to get a competitive edge because they're going to give it to you. Okay? All right, so all of this requires standards. If we haven't gotten together and decided what constitutes the best way to do things, we have nothing to measure against. Everybody can go out on their job and do it the best way they know how, and however that turns out is what we've got. If we establish standards, and we train people to them, and we measure to them, and we govern according to them, we begin to provide a foundation for improvement, for consistent and reliable performance, and then improvement across the base. If there is no base, there's no foundation. You can push on it all you want and want to improve it. You've got no foundation. It's like pushing in the wind. You can't improve consistently. So leaders must measure what's happening in the field relative to best practices. How are we doing relative to what the best people out there are doing? If you don't know what that is, you've got to find out. You've got to find out because you've got to measure yourself against it. That's your competition. Okay? And then you've got to identify any gaps, and then you've got to pull together those skill and stakeholders. You've got to define what's to be done differently, right? To deliver, first of all, the value to the clients, the contractual requirements as a minimum, and then the best, you got to say, okay, what's the best we know how to do? What's the best I know how to do? If I'm going to make a commitment, I jolly well better look at in the mirror and say, what's the best I can do relative to what the expectations are? If I can't do it, I better admit it and say, I don't know how to get this done. You know, expectations are here. I've done it this way before, but it didn't get to there. So you tell me how to do it. I'm willing to do it. Just tell me how. You've got to approach any gaps that exist there and pull together the skill and stakeholders to be able to do it. Okay? So you define the best that you know how to do. Maybe your team doesn't know how to do it better. Maybe you've got to go to an association in the industry. Or bring in a consultant. Bring in someone that can give you additional ideas on how to improve. Okay, so the best I can do should not be the limit. but should identify gaps between ability and what must be done. We define how it will be done safely, cheaper, faster than competitors, while everyone makes money doing it. Okay? Not how can we take advantage of other suppliers or beat them down. No, let's figure out how to help them to be successful. At the same time, we're being successful. Okay, this often constitutes the unraveling of expertise and the defining of expectations with credibility. You got the skill and stakeholders. Whoa, 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 whoa. If you got the skill and stakeholders here and they care, you've got credibility in defining what these standards are. And that then creates the basis for governance. Okay? Now, in every industry out there, if you go into mechanical welding, for example, if you go into any of the manufacturing firms that you find in the world, they're going to have a good base of standards. When you go into our industry, there's many, many standards that are available. Okay? We've developed them for all kinds of things, from welding to manufacturing, ASTM standards. The number of standards that we have available in our industry is pretty profound. And when you get into at least the heavy industries, you're going to subscribe so that you can get, you're going to pay $50,000 a year or something to subscribe to all this set of standards. So when you see them in your specs, when you see them on your drawings, you know where to go to get an understanding of what those standards are. Okay? So you need to get a good working knowledge of not only where to go to find the standards, but what those standards mean. Okay, what we're lacking right now in our industry is a significant set of what we call work process standards. How to go about combining the technical standards, the people, and the systems to accomplish the work that needs to be done safely, consistently, and reliably. Now remember that big old thing that I rolled out in front of you to show you what was going on when I was working with KBR, to develop that set of standards in the sequence that they need to be performed. Okay, we were just getting started in doing that when the executive pulled the plug on the resources to get it done. So anyway, that's why we don't have the consistency that we need. That's why we're not improving in our industry. We haven't built the foundation for what we expect people to do. We can't deliver it to them and say consistently, you do it this way, it's going to work. It constitutes best standards. Okay? Now that doesn't say that none of them exist. They do. And many times we have some of those in companies that we work for. And they're in the process of developing more. There needs to be a greater emphasis on that. And again, those best practice standards need to be sequenced. That sequence needs to be determined. Expertise is not only knowing what to be done, but when you need to be considering it, when you need to be doing it. What if you do first is going to facilitate the flow of the work so that you can do something differently. Okay, it doesn't work well to do the typical thing that we do is when we start a schedule, we get the people in the room for the project, and we start a timeline on the board. And we start putting sticky notes on the timeline. Okay, so what's the limitation of that? Why is that substantially less value than the development of standards and the sequence from the company as a whole? What happens when you get that group of people in the room and they start putting stuff on the board? What's the limit of that? Isn't it limited by what the people's memory is that are in the room at the time? Okay? Well, that might be entirely sufficient. Okay, maybe it's the best practice, you got all the best people in the company in the room for that project. But that's not typically the case. We have a limited number of those kind of people in the room. And what they happen to remember at the time that comes to mind is what gets on the board. Okay? And we miss many opportunities that could have been brought to bear had we taken the time as a company to define that with our best skill and stakeholders. And that then becomes the basis for our schedule. We look at that long list of standards and we say, well, this is a sequence that they need to be done in. These are the standards. Well, which ones of them apply? Right? We pull that off, that becomes the basis for our schedule. And then we integrate the knowledge and the experience of the people on the team. Okay? But it forms the foundation for us. For safety and all the other performance expectations on the project. It becomes the basis where the company can expect that you're going to do things that we've learned before. We've got our lessons learned built into that. Okay. So we define how what is happening will be rendered. Then the next thing is we have to define how what is happening will be rendered transparent to those who need to know when they need to know it. We don't want to overwhelm people with anything that is other than fit for purpose. And we do this defining of the rendering of the transparency is done by committing to the foreman to keep the general foreman appraised of progress relative to well-defined work packages. These work task packages should be defined according to the standards and the sequence of those standards. They constitute our corporate brain, our experience, our best understanding of how to do things. Okay? We take those standards, from those standards we develop work packages. Those work packages are reviewed by the foreman, and if he agrees that he can do it at this scope of work in this specific amount of time with these resources and information, then he is also elicited to commit to do so and to keep his general foreman appraised of how he's doing as it happens. And that's how we create the transparency. That's how we should create the transparency. Okay, any question about that? Okay, let's talk about authority and governance. Okay, it is only effective if it is a distributed ownership of outcome. Okay, what do I mean by the phrase ownership of outcome? Okay, so you get on the job site, you've got some experience underneath your belt, and you get to be the project manager. So now you're the project manager on the job site. Okay? Does that make you a leader? Does that make you so that you now have the transparency you need to be actually able to deliver? You can get the authority. That doesn't instantly make a leader, does it? Now, presumably you've got some leadership skill or evidence that someone is going to trust you enough to say, hey, I want you to be my leader, my project manager on this scope of work, right? Okay, in order to effectively govern, we have to build ownership of outcome. Okay? We have to say, okay, this is my realm, this is my watch, and this is what needs to happen. I own what happens. I own the delivery. And I'm committed to do whatever it takes to get that outcome. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to be perfect. That doesn't mean I have to make sure that, that there isn't a possibility that I may end up with something going on that I didn't anticipate and didn't plan for, and now I'm out of control. Okay? That is, I have a deviance now, a gap between what's happening and the outcome that I committed to. Okay? But if I own that outcome, I'm going to look to understand what that gap is, and if it opens, then I'm going to say, hey, it's time to huddle up and see, why that happened, and see immediately how to close the gap. Okay, in the safety arena, we call that a safety net, an ownership of outcome with a safety net. To say, okay, we have the intent, we have various people owning various things, outcomes that need to take place. If this one isn't happening, or we perceive it's not likely to happen, okay, we don't just throw our hands in the air or ignore it. We get together and we say, okay, this isn't happening. What was our intent? Okay, why isn't it happening? And how do we close that gap right here, right now, on my watch? Does that make sense? Okay, you've got to own outcome, not just process, so that if there's ever a gap between that outcome and what's happening, you own it. And you huddle up and you fix it as it happens. Does that make sense? This is real governance here. This ownership of outcome has to be bought into. Not just by the project manager. You're going to own outcome to the client, aren't you? Outcome, responsibility to the company. Responsibility every living person on that team in terms of their safety, right? All of those are outcomes you own, or you should own as a project manager. Does that make sense? Okay, so when this whole safety thing started to get a whole lot better was when a few managers, middle managers at DuPont made their way up the chain of command in DuPont to where executives at DuPont decided they were going to take ownership of safety. Okay, now what would that be? How would that be different from what they did before they did that? I mean, this was profound improvement here. This is the kind of breakthrough that we need someone to make, because if they do, they will dominate this industry. Not just in safety, but in productivity, in quality, in consistent, reliable performance. Okay, so executives before versus executives after, what's the difference? I mean, those are easy words to write in a PowerPoint. Made their way up the chain of command, got executives to take ownership of safety. What does that mean? What are those executives going to do differently after they breakfast in the morning? No idea? Think of yourself as an executive. Put yourself in their shoes. Okay, so I got to take ownership of safety. On projects, I'm not even the project manager of it, but I own the oil company, right? It's my project out there. I authorized it. I'm paying for it. My career is dependent on it, right? Okay, so I got to own safety? What does that mean? I do differently. Yeah?
First, you have to learn all about it. I feel like you have to know all the details about the safety plan, what you're pushing out to the people who are actually on projects.
Yeah. Okay, so first of all, I got to know what that means, don't I?